So a lot of people are on that vegan kick. They think, oh, I'm eating more plants. I see all these plant-based foods at the grocery store. I'm eating healthy. But those vegan cookies aren't necessarily good for you. Okay? So just because it's vegan doesn't mean it's health food. In fact, those vegan cookies or anything that can spike your glucose or your insulin, it actually may not be good for your brain and might actually contribute to dementia. Yes, we're about to get into it. Hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you again for tuning in. We are the Brewer Report. I'm Stacey Brewer, and this is my father, David Brewer. Today, as I said at the top, we're going to dive a little deeper into ultra processed vegan food. Like I said, on a previous podcast, we did talk about ultra processed vegan foods and how actually it's better for you than maybe ultra processed animal based foods. In fact, studies show that it may actually lower your diabetes risk, may lower your risk for heart disease, maybe even certain cancers. However, there are still some nuances because ultra processed vegan foods might actually not be good for your brain, however. So the gold standard still applies, and that is to eat mostly a whole food plant based diet. And for us, that would be the acronym created by Dr. Furman, which is the G Bombs diet, which is greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds. And my father and I, we add nuts to that acronym. And that's what we're going to get into today. We're going to talk about more the nuance of that. As always, with any particular diet that you partake in, definitely consult with your doctors because every system is different. You may be on certain medications. Your doctors would know better which diet or what type of diet plan is best for you. But we are researchers. We are sharing with you certain information that you can then perhaps again share with your doctor. We're pretty much doing the research for you, if you will. Although you should also do your own research as well, but we're hopefully giving you the roadmap so you can ask even more informed questions whenever you visit your doctor. All right, so let's get into it. Not all plant-based diets are healthy, as I said at the top. So let's get into it, Daddy.
Right. And so you see on the left, there's a vegan cookie. But it's basically processed junk food, period. And it's high in sugar and refined carbs. And it has a negative health impact on you. On the right side is the basically whole plant food, G bombs type diet. That's the plant based, nutrient rich, positive health trajectory, fiber, brain protective compounds. We're going to be talking a lot about the brain today. Vegan cookies are not the same as beans, greens, berries, seeds, and the brain does not read the label. It responds to ingredients. It doesn't read vegan, okay? It responds to the ingredients, and we're going to talk more about that later.
Right. Brain does not care about marketing schemes, if you will, because, that's all a marketing when you see plant-based this or vegan that. But it's your job to look at the ingredients, as my dad said. So let's talk about this study. It was an 11-year study where you had three groups. One group was eating unhealthful plant-based foods, such as the refined grains and added sugars, fruit juices, etc., heavily processed. And then you had one group that was kind of in the middle, eating, I guess, maybe some unhealthful, but maybe also some healthful plant-based foods, just kind of an overall plant-based diet. And then you had the healthful plant-based, and they were eating the whole grains, the legumes, pretty much the whole plant-based foods. And they did this for 11 years, but this was an observational study. So, I guess, Daddy, you can get more into that, but let's talk about what this study revealed.
Okay, so these people were eating what they thought was a plant based diet. In other words, they thought that by eating more plants, they were basically eating healthier. But what they were not understanding is the quality of those plant-based foods. For example, yeah, okay, refined grains, fruit juices, processed potatoes. Yeah, that's plant-based, but that's not good for you. In other words, it will basically have an impact on your brain, on in terms of your brain health. Now, it may help you a little bit on terms of your cholesterol and your cardiovascular system, but for your brain, no. So then, okay, so if I eat a little bit better in terms of those overall plant-based foods, maybe I'm not eating the refined grains now. I'm eating something a little bit healthier. All of them were eating vegan, but they found out was that the only way to reduce the risk of dementia in your brain was to move more towards whole grains, legumes, nuts, healthy oils, tea, coffee, etc. So I can tell you right now, in that middle group, they weren't getting enough fiber, period. Okay. And so, in essence, and probably we're getting some blood sugar spikes, even in that middle group. So, we're going to show you how to transition to a better plant-based diet to ensure that you don't have cognitive decline.
Okay, so let's talk about from harm reduction to dementia prevention. This I can speak on firsthand because, after my medical incident, I made the choice to eat mostly plant-based. But I have to admit, because I was mostly a meat eater, I had to transition into more of a plant-based diet. So I started here with what we call the good, better, best method. So I started with the good level. The good level is where you're swapping processed meat for ultra processed plant meats. This reduces carcinogens and your heart risk. So, in other words, I was obviously craving, because I was a meat eater, I wanted some regular chicken. I wanted a real burger. So during the week which is when I eat plant-based, I was eating ultra processed plant-based meats like the Beyond Burgers or Impossible Burgers, etc. But I was eating it heavily because I was still in that transition stage. But what I did find was the more I ate plant-based and the more my father was teaching me about the G-Bombs diet, so I was incorporating more whole food plant-based in my diets and honestly finding more recipes. Like there's a great chickpea recipe I found, and obviously our kale salad that we do, and the dates desserts that we've created. I started to transition more into the middle portion where, I was kind of obviously stepping away from the standard American diet more and more and embracing, I guess, more of the whole food, plant-based diet. And ultimately, I get to the level of best during the week. Like I said, I still will eat meat on the weekend, but during the week, I'm pretty high up there on the gold standard level, which is a whole food plant-based diet.
Right. It's like, as we say at the bottom, when I'll be honest with you, I like Beyond Burger, but I'm not going to eat a lot of it and we'll talk more about why we even eat those foods. But it's like the methadone, which is that drug that helps you transition off of actual harmful drugs, or even better, it's like the smoker who puts on the patch. Okay, smoker puts on the patch. Now it helps them in terms of smoking, but you really need to get rid of the patch so that you don't smoke at all, and you reach this higher level of health. And that higher level of health, of course, is the whole food plant-based diet, which we will talk more about. But that's more of your greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, etc. And so that's where you really want to transition to. And as we always say, we know everybody's not gonna go total plant-based. Okay, so even if you eat meat. Okay, even if you eat meat, you lead with that gold standard up there. Okay, you lead with that whole food plant-based diet. I do it through a super kale salad. You've seen our video on that. We do a kale salad, kale, arugula, onions, beans, rice, etc. And guess what? When you get that into your system, it helps to absorb some of that saturated fat and other harmful stuff that may come behind that when you eat meat, or even the vegan meat. Okay. So
Yeah, and
this
your
is
taste buds may start changing, which is what
right. And your
happened with
taste
me.
buds are going to change. But more importantly, this is about protecting your brain. Okay. You may eating that way can help you with your cardiovascular system, may even help you with cancer. But now we're talking about protecting your brain.
And just real quick, think of the good level, like this is like steps. So honestly, I think most people will be between the better and best. I think we both can agree we kind of go between those two because very few people will just always be gold standard. So I will say I'm probably more between the better and best. But the good, I think, the more I look at it, that's for people to kind of have a guide. Think of it as maybe you will continue to eat meat during the week, but try to swap at least one of your meat days for one of these plant-based burgers. Maybe look at the good that way. Better would be if we'll talk more about percentages later, but better would be if you could have plant-based, best plant-based 5 to 6 days out of the week. But, it's a process. So let's talk more about the brain. The 5 reasons the brain cares about food quality.
Right. So, okay, one of them is quite obvious, and that's on the inflammation side. Food, you don't want foods that are high in terms of inflammation because that damages your blood vessels and the brain cells, period. High inflammatory foods. Now, insulin resistance is where things really get interesting because the brain really the brain needs blood sugar. I mean, it needs sugar and glucose. But when you have a surging blood sugar coming into your brain, that's when you create something that they now call type 3 diabetes. In other words, you have way too much sugar running into your brain, and that starts to damage your brain significantly because there's insulin resistance. And we talk about that insulin is that key that opens up those tissues in your brain to absorb the glucose. But if it's running wild in there, it's going to basically create type 3 diabetes in your brain, which starts to lead to Alzheimer's. And then the vascular damage. In other words, your brain demands oxygen. Again, when we go back to our high nitrate vegetables like arugula, beets, etc., that's giving your brain a lot of oxygen, and it also reduces the high blood pressure in your body as well as your brain, which restricts the blood flow to your brain. Blood flow is gold, period. Okay. Then the gut brain axis. There's this artery that basically runs from your gut up to your brain. And so you want to feed your brain with fiber. Okay. Fiber helps to regulate the immunity and inflammation in your brain. That's why fiber is so important. And of course, the oxidative stress, high antioxidant foods. We preach that at nauseum. The highest antioxidant drinks, which are matcha green tea and hibiscus tea. The highest antioxidant vegetables, broccoli sprouts, etc. So you basically want to continue to drink and eat high antioxidant foods and drinks, period. That protects your brain.
Yes. Now, let's get into the plant-based quality matrix. Intact wheat, berries, oats, berries, quinoa, that's the healthful and intact side because you want, again, that fiber. Whereas white bread, refined pastas, pastries, crackers, all that is unhealthful. It's pure sugar in your system. On a previous podcast, my father and I talked about potatoes. You want to cool your boiled potatoes and purple sweet potatoes. You don't want the French fries and potato chips. And my dad may have more to say on that.
Right. What they found, okay, I mean, the left side is quite obvious. I mean, that's high in antioxidants, it's high in fiber, etc. Okay, so we eat purple sweet potatoes, but one of the things that they tell you about potatoes is you should steam them or boil them. Don't bake them because when you bake them, it generates more sugar in them. So again, sugar is a will help to damage the brain. Too much sugar. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why. Okay, obviously the whole berries, citrus, apples, etc. Fiber, and more fiber. Now on the right side, you see 100% fruit juice. What they found was 100% fruit juice, that orange juice and grapefruit juice without pulp causes a sugar surge. Okay, period. Of course, the vegan cookies we've already talked about it, and sweetened plant yogurt. I buy yogurt, but it is always unsweetened. I do not buy anything with sugar in it. And of course, the ultimates is black beans, lentils, edamame, fiber, and more fiber. And we're going to talk more about that in terms of the protein. But you have also ultra processed vegan burgers, the Beyonds, etc. Okay. Again, you want to eat those in moderation. And of course, the drinks. The highest antioxidant beverages, matcha green tea, hibiscus tea, and of course, unsweetened coffee, which is also good. Sweet tea, bottled smoothies, soda, sugar, and more sugar. You don't want that.
Right. So the issue is not whether a food comes from a plant. The issue is whether the food still behaves like food in your system. So obviously, the gold standard of eating whole plant-based foods, that's real food, as we all know. Now, the five traps of junk food veganism, we've pretty much already emphasized this, but there's a few things like we've already talked about the meat to starch swap. That can be problematic where you're just swapping meat for white pastas and the refined carbs, etc. And then you want to avoid obviously the liquid sugars like the fruit juices and the sodas and the sweetened plant milks, etc. We're going to talk deeper into protein, particularly for those who are getting older. It's critical, especially if you're transitioning to a plant-based diet. But let's talk about this vegan halo effect. Again, like I said at the top, a lot of people say, well, this is vegan, so this is healthy. No, vegan ice cream is ice cream. It just
It's
isn't
sugar.
dairy.
It's
Yeah, it's
sugar.
sugar. So you still need it in moderation. And my dad can talk also on number five, the B12 blind spot. When you're becoming, because I know some of this may be new for some of you in terms of a plant-based diet. So it's important that you understand why you need this number five, the B12.
Right, absolutely, because you can get in fact, I have a friend who was vegan and he wasn't obviously getting enough B12 because B12 really that's an animal-based vitamin. And so what you have to do if you're eating more plant-based, you have to supplement. You have to either take B12 supplement, we do a sublingual, or add nutritional yeast. Even in my popcorn or whatever, even on my salads, I'll add nutritional yeast to make sure that I'm getting all the B vitamins that I need. Uh, and so that's extremely important. And so B12 is a trap. Okay. You got to be very careful if you're plant-based and make sure you're supplementing and adding B12, vitamin B to your diet, either through supplement or via nutritional yeast, etc.
Yes. Nutritional yeast you'll find once you start your vegan journey or plant-based journey, nutritional yeast is like a staple for vegans. So let's get more into Dr. Furman's G-Bombs diet again. We've said this a lot on previous podcasts, but for those of you who may be new to our podcast, we'll talk on it here again. Uh, Please forgive us for the misspellings in this in this particular slide. We're working with Gemini and it hallucinates sometimes. Okay, so G bombs is greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the ultimate diet, period. Plus nuts. Obviously, kale and collards and spinach. And of course, our favorite is arugula, which gives you that high nitrate, etc. Beans are clearly the fiber, and more fiber, but more, just as important, protein. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then the sulfur compounds in onions and garlic and raw onions. They're prebiotic for the vascular health. They're good for your vascular health, as well as mushrooms, which are good for your immune system. And of course, berries are high in antioxidants. And of course, seeds and more seeds. Flax seeds are a must. Omega 3. That's what you have to have also if you're more plant-based. Omega 3. In fact, on my cheat day, one of the reasons I'll eat fish on my cheat day, which is once a week, is because of omega 3. I want to get some more, I want to make sure I'm getting omega 3. But I also put flax seeds and chia seeds and walnuts. I eat walnuts, that's my favorite nut. I eat walnuts as well, omega 3. Okay. And so these are really critical and these are very important for the brain.
Now let's show them the Brewer Brain Plate. We have 50% green and colorful veggies. Again, the G Bombs acronym applies here. 50%
Absolutely.
50% greens. So in other words, the majority of your plate should be greens
Right.
and cruciferous vegetables.
Absolutely. And that's why I lead with the huge salad, and a lot of some of these other things on the right are in the salad. But I start the day off with matcha green tea and a squeezed lemon on an empty stomach, period. Because you got to get that EGCG into your system. And then you want to eat as much in terms of the color. You want to eat red cabbage, red onions, mushrooms, peppers, collards, broccoli. We love broccoli sprouts, which is the highest antioxidant veggie. Broccoli sprouts are on that left side. And then, of course, we eat with the brain fat topping. As I said before, I always add chia seeds, flax seeds, and walnuts, and a touch of EVOO, extra virgin olive oil, because we use turmeric a lot, and so extra virgin olive oil with a little bit of black pepper, you can absorb the curcumin and the turmeric, etc., and as well as okay, and the rest of it is black rice. People say, well, where can you get black rice? You buy it right there in the grocery store. Most grocery stores have black and purple rice. You don't want white rice, period. That's a sugar bomb. Again, think about your brain. You don't want to be eating a lot of white rice because you don't want to be pumping all that glucose up into your brain and creating type 3 diabetes in your brain. Okay? So you need to eat either brown, black, or purple rice. Okay? That's it. And of course, you finish it off with my our favorite berries, blueberries, and now, as we've talked about during our previous podcast, one of the key seeds we now eat, pomegranate seeds and pomegranate juice.
Right. So this is pretty much, we're just emphasizing what we've already discussed. The 24-hour reflection challenge. If you ate plant-based yesterday, which version did you actually eat? Like we said, you want the protective path. You want version A. You want whole food plant-based, oatmeal, berries, walnuts, pretty much the G-Bombs diet. You don't want the sugar bombs, white toast, vegan cookies, chips, fries, etc. That's not good for your brain. Both of these days are technically plant-based, like we said, but only one provides the specific biological tools your brain requires to age well. So, again, 3 high impact brain swaps. Like in the morning, take your white toast with jelly, swap it for the oatmeal with berries. You get your fiber, your antioxidants. Take your vegan cookies and coffee, swap that for an apple with almond butter or walnuts, plus unsweetened tea. Or my dad has a new recipe for the dates and chocolate. He adds pomegranate seeds. This creates a stable blood sugar. And then instead of white pasta with processed vegan cheese, have lentil pasta with mushrooms, onions, garlic, greens, tomato sauce. This gives you your protein and vascular support. And now my dad will get deeper into his brain day.
Yes, as I said before, I start my morning off with matcha green tea and a squeezed lemon on an empty stomach so that antioxidant EGCG can get absorbed because EGCG and matcha green tea will not absorb as well if you have food in your stomach. So you want to do that on an empty stomach. And of course, the breakfast is, as you can see, high fiber, high fiber, high fiber. I mean, steel cut oats, mixed berries, walnuts, flax seeds, cinnamon, etc., and unsweetened soy milk. Soy milk is actually pretty high in protein, by the way. And of course, for lunch, kale, we're going green. You got to get that green, and then you're going red. You got to get those red onions and tomatoes. Again, tomatoes are actually better when they're heated because that releases the lycopene in them. And of course, pumpkin seeds. Now, one of the things that I will do when I eat my pumpkin seeds is to make sure that I have some type of citrus drink, like hibiscus tea with lemon, or in my case, again, going back to the juice, I blend my grapefruit juice, okay, because I know that you have to have the fiber. So I will drink blended grapefruit juice with that fiber and my pumpkin seeds because guess what? The citric acid in the grapefruit juice helps you to absorb the zinc in the pumpkin seeds. And zinc is good for what? Your immune system. Period. And then, of course, snacks, hummus. I'm a hummus guy. Carrots and hummus, I'm all in. In fact, I just bought some hummus today. So, hummus, beans. think beans. And of course, for dinner, the super bean is lentils, very high in fiber, very high in protein. And of course, garlic, greens, turmeric, again, turmeric. Black rice plus beans, a whole is a complete protein. And of course, in the evening, hibiscus tea with lemon.
Yes, that's quite a packed day. Quite a packed, healthy day for my dad there. Now, we talked about the protein question for older adults. For adults over 60, a low protein vegan diet is dangerous. You must protect your muscle, your immune function, and balance through a protein conscious, high fiber, plant forward diet. Because a lot of people feel that, oh, if I'm only eating plants, I'm not getting protein. That's not necessarily true. You just, again, have to have a whole food plant based diet so you can ensure you are getting those necessary nutrients.
Absolutely. And in the beans category, I mean, we can't we can't beat that drum any louder. You got to have beans and more beans. And tofu and edamame are all in the legumes of the beans category. Tofu is actually fairly high in protein and fiber as well as edamame. Okay, they're very high. So if they're high in protein, then you're going to start to get enough in terms of your muscle. For adults over 60, you need more protein. So that means you need to live on this left side in terms of legumes, etc. And of course, in the middle there, you have the grains and seeds and hemp seeds. Again, I've talked about the pumpkin seeds in terms of zinc. Hemp seeds, of course, also have a combination of omega-3 and omega-6. So you're also getting some additional protein in hemp seeds, by the way. So these are very high. And of course, nuts and then pea protein milk is very high in protein. So quinoa is the ultimate because quinoa is a complete protein. You don't need you don't need you don't need anything other than that. In other words, you don't need rice with beans in order to complete the protein. Quinoa is a complete protein.
Right. And remember, I was saying at the beginning, we are not actually fully plant based ourselves. I slide when we talk about, again, let me see if I can go back to it, just in case some of you may have forgotten. When we go back to this good, better, best, I tend to slide between the better and best, to be honest. I do have a free day where, again, I'm not eating plant based. So, what we have established is the 80/20 rule for sustainability, built around intact, whole, plant based foods, the G Bombs diet. Your other 10 to 20% can occasionally be the ultra processed, beyond burgers and hot dogs and things like that. And then for us, sometimes animal based foods for 10 to 20%. It's all about what works best for you, but we definitely recommend a majority plant based diet. But again, talk to your doctors. Again, we are not aiming for perfection. If your foundation is solid, an occasional treat is not the issue. The danger to your brain is when the treat becomes the daily pattern.
Absolutely. If you're feeding your brain with those treats with that high sugar and etc., then that's a problem. You can't do that. And low antioxidants. Remember, oxidative stress will also take out your brain. So the bottom line is you want high antioxidant foods, and even with foods that do have some sugar in them or glucose, they need to be extremely high in fiber. So you slow that progression of glucose into your brain, which gives your liver, et cetera, a chance to pump out that insulin and make sure that they can process that sugar.
Right. And here are some clinical cautions and essential supplements we've already discussed, particularly on the fully vegan checklist. Vitamin B12, very, very important. Vitamin D, iodine, calcium, zinc, iron, and omega-3 fats, as my dad said.
Yeah, you see, and I'm working with some friends right now. They're trying to transition off of high blood pressure pills, cholesterol pills, blood thinners, etc. And I just tell them, I say, listen, this is a process that you have to work out with your doctor. We can show you the foods to eat. That's not the problem. But some foods are going to interfere with some of these medications. In other words, it's going to enhance them to the point where your blood pressure may go out of sight low. You may end up with your blood too thin, etc. So this is a process. You have to slowly but surely transition to these foods. And that's the name of the game. You want to get off of medication because of all the side effects. But in essence, but you have to build a transition plan with your doctor. Period.
Yes, and that's the key. Create a plan with your doctor. Because as we said, the brain does not care about the label, the brain cares about the ingredients. So, yes, eat more plants, but choose the right plants. So, our question for you today is what healthful plant based food are you going to add to your diet today? Be sure to leave that below for us in the comment section and just chat with us. Let us know. But that's our show for today. As always, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And let's just try to stay healthy the best we can. It's not about perfection, it's just about choosing the best foods for you majority of the time. It's about that good, better, best. Always try to be between the better and best in your life.